Mali, a West African country often associated with its rich cultural history and ancient empires, has made global headlines in recent years for an unexpected achievement, becoming a debt-free nation. What makes this development particularly astonishing is that it was achieved under the leadership of military rulers, a group historically criticized for prioritizing power consolidation over economic growth. This video examines how Mali, despite a turbulent political landscape marked by military coups and power struggles, managed to extricate itself from the grip of foreign debt. It is a story of economic reform, strategic planning, and a renewed sense of national sovereignty, offering a case study in unconventional governance that defies the typical narrative of military rule in Africa. Mali's economic challenges are deeply rooted in its colonial past and post-independence struggles. After gaining independence from France in 1960, the country faced the daunting task of building a self-sufficient economy from scratch. Like many newly independent African nations, Mali turned to international financial institutions such as the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank for assistance. These organizations offered loans with conditions that seemed helpful in the short term, but ultimately led to a cycle of dependency and debt. In the 1980s and 1990s, Mali adopted several structural adjustment programs imposed by these lenders, which included austerity measures, privatization of state assets, and a shift towards export-oriented policies. While these reforms promised economic stability, they often had the opposite effect, deepening poverty and widening the wealth gap. By the early 2000s, Mali's debt had ballooned to unsustainable levels, and the nation struggled to meet its repayment obligations, pushing the country towards economic turmoil. The rise of military rule in Mali is a direct response to widespread dissatisfaction with civilian governance, corruption, and economic mismanagement. In 2012, a military coup ousted the democratically elected government, citing the failure to curb insurgencies and the inability to improve the country's economic standing. The coup marked the beginning of a new era of military rule, characterized by a strong sense of nationalism and a desire to break free from foreign influence. Colonel Assimi Goïta, who emerged as the de facto leader following subsequent coups, presented himself as a pragmatic nationalist, determined to restore Mali's sovereignty and economic independence. Although many observers viewed the military takeover with skepticism, arguing that it would lead to further instability, Goïta's regime surprised the international community by taking a bold and strategic approach to tackling the nation's economic woes. Under military rule, Mali's economic policies shifted drastically. The new leaders implemented a series of reforms that prioritized domestic revenue generation, reduced dependency on foreign aid, and focused on self-reliance. The military government pursued a twofold strategy, boosting local industries and renegotiating foreign debt obligations. 1. Strengthening domestic industries. Agriculture, particularly cotton and gold mining, has always been the backbone of Mali's economy. The military leadership placed a renewed emphasis on these sectors, launching programs to support small farmers and increase productivity. By investing in modern farming techniques, improving irrigation systems, and providing subsidies to local producers, the government aimed to enhance food security and reduce the need for costly imports. In the mining sector, the military rulers renegotiated contracts with foreign mining companies, demanding better terms for the nation. They increased taxes on mining profits and required companies to invest a portion of their earnings back into local communities. These measures helped boost government revenues and ensured that a greater share of the country's mineral wealth stayed within its borders. 2. Cutting ties with international financial institutions. One of the most controversial aspects of Mali's economic reforms was the decision to limit engagement with international financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. The military rulers argued that the stringent conditions imposed by these lenders were stifling the nation's growth and sovereignty. Instead, they sought alternative sources of funding and investment, turning to regional partners and seeking support from countries like China and Russia, who were willing to invest without imposing Western-style austerity measures. Mali's path to becoming debt-free was not easy. The military government adopted a meticulous and assertive approach to debt repayment, focusing on clearing arrears and negotiating with creditors for better terms. The regime initiated a debt-for-development strategy where they offered to repay a portion of their outstanding debts through in-kind contributions and infrastructure projects, rather than cash. This approach allowed Mali to settle its debts while simultaneously building much-needed infrastructure. Additionally, the government pursued aggressive measures to crack down on corruption and financial mismanagement. By tightening controls on public spending and enhancing tax collection mechanisms, they were able to significantly boost state revenues. The newfound fiscal discipline and increased domestic revenue enabled Mali to pay down its debt faster than expected. While Mali's achievement of becoming debt-free under military rule is remarkable, it has not been without significant challenges and criticisms. The military regime's emphasis on economic reforms was often accompanied by political repression. Critics argue that the focus on sovereignty and debt elimination came at the cost of democratic freedoms, with opposition leaders, journalists, and activists facing intimidation and imprisonment. Furthermore, the decision to reduce reliance on Western financial institutions has strained Mali's relations with traditional allies. The shift towards alternative partners, particularly China and Russia, has raised concerns about the potential long-term consequences of such alignments, including new forms of dependency and geopolitical risks. The military government's economic reforms have yielded impressive short-term results. Mali's GDP growth has stabilized, inflation has been brought under control, and the nation's reserves have grown, providing a cushion against future economic shocks. However, the question of long-term sustainability remains open. The current economic model, heavily reliant on mining and agriculture, is vulnerable to global price fluctuations and environmental challenges. To maintain its debt-free status and continue its path towards sustainable development, Mali must diversify its economy and invest in human capital. The government has announced plans to expand its educational and healthcare systems, recognizing that a healthy, educated workforce is essential for long-term economic stability. Mali's journey to becoming a debt-free nation under military rule offers a unique case study in economic sovereignty and resilience. It challenges the conventional wisdom that military regimes are inherently detrimental to economic progress, showing that with strategic planning, a focus on self-reliance, and a willingness to challenge the status quo, even the most unlikely of leaders can steer a country towards financial independence. For other African nations grappling with unsustainable debt, Mali's experience offers valuable lessons. It underscores the importance of prioritizing domestic resource mobilization, renegotiating unfair terms with international creditors, and pursuing a clear vision of economic sovereignty. While the methods employed by Mali's military rulers may not be universally applicable or without controversy, they have undeniably reshaped the narrative of what is possible in the face of seemingly insurmountable economic challenges. In a world where economic dependence often equates to political vulnerability, Mali's story is an indication to the power of bold, unconventional leadership and the enduring desire for true independence. Whether this path will lead to long-term prosperity remains to be seen, but for now, Mali stands as an example of a nation that dared to break free from the cycle of debt and chart its own course.